got you, don't worry.
Okay.
All right. For everybody who doesn't know, this is my philosophy.
Yeah.
So I got to tread a little lightly, but not too much. I also want to thank everybody at the panel for coming and dedicating some of your time to this discussion today. It's great. And Angela with the American Democracy Project, Dr. Benyon, and the Political Science Club volunteers that are here today helping out. Yeah, well, I had plenty to come in here. Now you guys spoke, and I got a lot more. But we'll try to wrap through my section real quick. I want to speak to everybody today on behalf of my lifetime dealing with discrimination, hate crimes. I've had friends murdered for hate crimes. I've dealt with it as a minority myself, and as a person who passes as a white person that don't realize that they're talking to a minority. It's a little awkward at times for me, being a light-skinned Hispanic. But what we're here to talk about today, what I'm here to talk about, is that we have not the most exacting standards for the vendors here at IUSB, and that can lead to issues such as IUSBs being a participant in the funding of bigotry. And I'll use this word, and I wanted to go ahead and, you my clicker?
Yep.
Okay, click. I want to go ahead and define it so I'm not held responsible for the definition as I'm going to be using it today. Separate and complete intolerance of any creed or belief in the actions of belief or prejudice of someone who is in category 1 there. So that's the definition that I'm working with, so it's not going to be an arbitrary term that I'm just throwing around. You can go ahead and click. This is from the IUSB's diversity vision statement. The university has already established standards for what they support. Chick-fil-A has been violating these standards without being on the university's radar until now, and the administration was correct to look into this, but I think they're a little hasty in considering this a closed issue, and we'll get to that in a second. The types of issues that we're having today are going to come up again. Just today there's been another panel held about sweatshop clothing being sold to us through Barnes & Nobles in our very own bookstore. So unless we start addressing the issue instead of going to these symptoms, then we're going to have some problems here in the long run. There are legitimate reasons for these types of outcries, the types that the students brought to the administration's attention, and the types that are going to be addressed today for the sweatshop clothing in the bookstore. But we're going to look specifically at Chick-fil-A today to illuminate how this can be more of an issue for the university. As I said, Chancellor Rex stated her reason for reinstating or finishing the lift, as I understand it, was that there wasn't a direct tie to this local franchise that supplies our university and the incident in Pennsylvania, which was a completely separate franchise. So working with that, she was correct, and the investigation was correct. There were no ties between that instance. But what was overlooked, or presumably the administration was unaware of this connection, go ahead and click again, is that Chick-fil-A has a charitable arm that works directly from the funds that they get from Chick-fil-A corporate called the Windshape Foundation. And the Windshape Foundation is involved in funding many other organizations. The Windshape Foundation alone, though, does do marital counseling training, family training, and they do exclude homosexual couples from their training events and retreats at their facility. So that is just one instance of immediate discrimination that's being done by Chick-fil-A. Go ahead and click. These are some of the other groups that Chick-fil-A founds through the Windshape Foundation. This is Exodus International. I think their logo speaks for themselves. They're claiming freedom from homosexuality as if it were a disease since 1978. Go ahead. National Organization for Marriage, another traditional family conglomerate, to help work and propose and write the legislation for Proposition 8 in California. Ruth Institute, another one that's pretty simple. They just started new ties to this organization. They're working on a joint enterprise to do more promotion. But again, focus on the family. Lou Dobbs, another traditional family promoter. And the last one is Impact 360, which is a training group for students. Page 14 of their manual states explicitly that you are not to be homosexual, you are not to discuss homosexuality, you're not to promote homosexuality or discuss the issues. So this is how I see Chick-fil-A being discriminative, and I think that's a very direct line. And my professor here says since it gets a little muddy, I figured I'd use his own terms. He said it was clearly unethical if it supports discrimination against a particular group, and I think every single one of these groups promotes discrimination against a particular group, as he defined it. This is the exact quote from the statement that REC had issued to the university. IU South Bend is committed to IU's policies on non-discrimination and diversity. This is critical. Upon review, it is clear that the local Chick-fil-A franchise providing sandwiches to campus in no way violates their spirited policies. Now, that was the one instance I was telling you about, and they were correct about that. And what Ken was saying on authority, I believe, from Rec was that the review is the right thing to do. And if the review is the right thing to do the first time, then it's definitely the right thing to do now. The Pennsylvania incident was one incident. I've just exposed over half a dozen direct other links to discriminatory acts by Chick-fil-A and the Windshape Foundation. Go ahead. Discrimination and discriminatory businesses have been supported throughout our nation's history. The 1964 Civil Rights Act leveraged the federal authority over the state's interstate trade and commerce to regulate their actions and discriminatory policies. The businesses set the tone for what's allowable in our society. And in order to work on that, we have to address the businesses directly. And another point I wanted to mention was that I don't believe that there is such a thing as a gay agenda. I think the GLBT community is not an aggressor, that they are a naturally neutral group of people who find themselves having to defend the right to be who they are, and they're under constant attack from groups such as the ones I've just listed, having affiliations with CFA's Windshape. They don't go into churches and attack parishioners, but even if they have different opinions, they surely aren't trying to take away anybody's rights as they are having done to them. This is a one-way street. They are the only ones having people come to them and say that you are less than I am, and I can have privileges that you can't, because I'm better than you. These include marriage rights, ability to visit spouses in the hospital, or have spousal rights, but you can't have those without the marriages. And I think we've seen discriminatory practices in that same tone of you're less than I am, I can have privileges that you can't, because I'm better than you. Go ahead. Now, I'm going to skip a little bit because we are running short on time, but I do want to talk about how a difference of opinion, there's a lot of conversation about opinion and belief, but I wanted to talk about how a difference of opinion can start to actually hurt people. If you're an opinion you're better than a group of people, it leads to you treating them as inferiors. You start to dehumanize them, and then it makes it easier to be indifferent, and your offenses against them start to escalate. We've seen this historically time and time again, and probably the most prominent example in our nation's history would be the way that the black Americans were treated post-Civil War America, supposedly having these rights, but still there was an entire culture of hatred that spread throughout the country and resulted in deaths of Emmett Till, lynchings, protester deaths, anytime that there was trying to strike, for their own civil rights. But this mentality does create an undeniable culture of hate against minority groups. And I wanted to take a quick look at some of the victims of this modern culture of hate that IUSB's complacency in dealing with Chick-fil-A is helping to create. A lot of you are familiar with Tyler Clemente, the young man who jumped off the bridge at Rutgers University this last year because he was videotaped secretly having sex with another man, and it was broadcast over the internet. He didn't know how to react to it because he understood that society wasn't accepting of him, and he jumped off the bridge and took his own life. This is Asher Brown. Asher shot himself the day after being kicked down 2 consecutive flights of stairs in his own school. He was bullied for 18 months prior to the time he took his own life, and he was 13 years old. Seth Walsh was also bullied at school for being gay. Oh, that's the common denominator here. All these kids were bullied for being gay. He hung himself in his backyard to escape the hell of bigotry, and he didn't die instantly like Asher until he was discovered, taken to the hospital, spent 9 days in the intensive care unit, and then finally succumbed to his wounds. I could do this all day, but this is the last one. That's the sad thing. I could literally do this all day. This is Jaheim Herrera. He was another child who could no longer bear the taunts about his homosexuality. This one really ticks me off because he hung himself in his room, and it was his 10-year-old sister that got to find his body. Now this affects all of the family. This is not just one incident of a child. It's a child, their family, their immediate family, their extended family. All of them suffer because the society says to these people that you are inferior and there's no place for you here. And I could really, when this stuff happens, I could really care less about all the other things Chick-fil-A does. And I understand they do great things, but it doesn't absolve them from the fact that they are actually helping participate and promote the culture that creates these bad things. And also, the university, as far as I see it, has no justification for allowing us to be a participant in the funding of a culture that creates this type of issue. So I wanted to come up with some solutions. Obviously, there was power and authority to a certain extent from the administrative level, pardon me, to create a suspension. If they have the power to create a suspension, they should have the power to create an outright ban. And based on the information that I presented today, I do ask the university to reinstate the ban upon further review. My second suggestion is longer term. I propose a bicameral vendor review board comprised of student faculty branches that uses our existing diversity statement as the litmus, which could probably be added to that code of conduct. Yeah, that definitely could be added to the code of conduct. It's just another, yeah, I'm all for it. Vote me. And then go ahead, click again. But this approach might not please everyone. Some people still argue IUSB must allow free market to operate, even though I don't see a standard aside contracts that guarantees any type of business right, except for their right to compete. Which brings me to my next point about competition. I had a guest that was going to be here today, but unfortunately he wasn't able to make it because he was traveling. His name is John Shockey. I don't know if you know him. He's a leader in the local business community. He runs a Truman's Entertainment Complex. And he has facilities and the will and the desire to start supplying IUSB with food the same way Chick-fil-A does. And I will be getting him in touch with the administration to see if they can get him set up. He meets all the requirements that were set forth that we had reviewed earlier in the day. But, so to review, the local Chick-fil-A gives money to CFA Corp. This is the line, this is the direct connection. Unless they found a way to dodge corporate franchise fees, the money that's coming from our lunchroom is going to fund these groups I showed you earlier. It then donates to groups that feed this culture of intolerance towards the very same group of people that IUSB takes great pride in supporting. There is a clear moral conflict for the university at this point. The university failed to realize that their fears concerning Chick-fil-A contributions were valid and should therefore immediately reinstate their ban. The ban is legitimate because Chick-fil-A is in direct violation of the mission and diversity statement of the university. There are ways for the university to police their vendors' agenda. Go ahead. I made that, so if anyone gets in trouble, it's going to be me. There are multiple ways of handling this situation. We're not out to win the battle. We're here to win the war against any company that comes to our school wanting to fund their lifestyles on divisiveness, child labor, hatred, exploitation, or any other underhanded means of making a dollar. But there be no doubt in anyone's mind that any time this student body finds out that someone is trying to make us willing participants in injustice towards another human being, we will come after you, destroy your arguments, and we'll throw you, your chicken sandwiches, and your sweatshop clothes clean across the river. Provide the free market to someplace else.
Okay, I think Jason has gotten us off to a good start in our dialogue and discussion and room for respectful disagreement. Are there questions